Welcome to episode 11 of Author Talk. Today I'm interviewing author and sportscaster Jeff Gorman. Jeff's unique career path as a writer began with him becoming a ring announcer in the wild and entertaining world of professional wrestling. After experiencing this world firsthand, Jeff wrote about its history and its outrageous characters in King of New York, King of Atlanta, and King of Philadelphia. Jeff has also written Wrestling is Real, a fictional tale of a small boy who dreams of someday becoming a pro wrestler. On a more personal note, Jeff's book, This Side of the Mic, details the love for sports he developed at a young age, his adventures as a sportscaster, and what eventually led him to take a hiatus from the announcing he loves. Other than recognizing the name Hulk Hogan, I know next to nothing about the world of professional wrestling. So I'm really looking forward to what I know will be an interesting interview, and I know you'll find it interesting as well. So let's welcome Jeff. So welcome, Jeff.
Hey, thanks for having me, Debbie. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for joining me. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing great. Thanks.
Great. So to begin, can you tell our viewers a little bit about yourself, your life, where you grew up, your wife, your daughter, your career?
All right. It's kind of the whole story of my life.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, so I was born in Akron. My parents are both teachers, so we're a very education-minded family. We wake up and everybody goes to school. Every day, everybody goes to school, and then in the summer, nobody goes to school, or even to work, was nice. We all got to be together in the summertime, and ended up going to St. Vincent St. Mary, which is where my mom taught French and Spanish. Of course, my dad was also a fantastic teacher as well out in Wadsworth. He was a legendary English teacher out there. So then, when it came time to go to college, my brother already went to Northwestern in the Chicago area. And from him, I learned that was a great journalism school. And that's what I wanted to do, to be a writer for the newspaper and be a broadcaster as well. So I wanted to go to, a great school like that, and got to be with my brother a little bit out there. And
okay. I didn't realize that's where you had gone.
Yeah. Okay. So I sort of started in the newspaper business, very modestly, of course, when I got out of school, and I didn't pay very much. I was living with my parents until I was 28, and finally, I was able to finally afford to get out on my own. And Jennifer and I got married 24 years ago, and then we had our baby 23 years ago. She likes to joke that it was the very next day, but it was the following year. We were going out for our first anniversary, and the doctor said, "You have to go have the baby right now." And I said,
my goodness.
Oh, yeah. And I said, we had tickets to a show and everything. We have this big night out and stuff. And he says, "No, you're going." She was a few weeks early. We were planning on this. She said, "So you're going to the hospital right now." And I said, this is how serious it was. I said, "Can we pick up some stuff at home before we get to the hospital? It's on the way." And he said, "No." I'm like, "Oh, shoot."
Really?
Yeah, so I had to hustle to the hospital right away. And then the next morning we had our baby.
Oh, that's awesome.
And so we're very blessed to have each other and our kid for 23 and 24 years, respectively.
That was probably a wild ride to the hospital.
It actually was. And once we realized what we had to do, we just drive straight there. But mentally, it was very jarring because we weren't planning to have her right now. And I was freaking out because I didn't have the crib set up yet. And
no.
But ultimately, it worked out. She ended up having
That's
a crib.
Great.
Yeah.
That's great.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to start by asking you, I've read a lot of different things about you, and that one of the things I read is that you dreamed of being a sportscaster from a young age. So what was the origin of that dream?
It's interesting. It's like, I love sports so much, and I didn't really have the dream of being a ball player. It's like, I want to grow up and play baseball. And I mean, I liked it, but I never envisioned myself as being the player. I always envisioned myself as being the announcer. I remember when I was 4 years old, going to my first ball game with my dad to see the Indians, and I heard the announcer, and I thought that was so cool. I remember, his voice, what he sounds like. batting in the third position. And that's what he sounded like back in 1975, watching the Indians play the Red Sox. And I was just hooked on baseball really from a very young age. I would read the newspaper as a little kid, a very little kid. People were surprised that I could read, and I would go to my brother's ball games and I would be watching him and I would be talking about all the baseball players, and people would quiz me like, hey, who plays second base for the California Angels? And I knew the answer. So I was
That is
sort of
so
like a
neat.
little baseball guru when I was like a little kid. I would sort of astonish people by my baseball knowledge. That was like really what I was into. And it helped me learn how to read, really.
That is so neat, like that you were drawn to that, just the announcing from a young age, the sound of the announcer's voice. And I watched a clip of you, and I don't know what match it was, but one of the fellow announcers, I guess it was talking about how you were such a guru, like you knew all the statistics. So that just came naturally. You just had that memory retention that was amazing from a young age.
Pretty much, if there's a sport that I like, I'll learn everything about it. And it was, if it was baseball or basketball or football. And then later on, of course, it became wrestling. And, because if you're going to be the announcer, you really have to be the authority. You really have to love it. And you really have to know everything about it so that you can answer the questions that are popping up in the viewers' minds. And that's what I admired, of course, here in Cleveland, we were blessed to have some really great announcers like Joe Tate for the Cavaliers. And, and I just learned by like listening to them on the radio, how to describe a basketball game and the different spots on the court where they're shooting the ball from. And then, just the announcers that the Indians had, people like, Herb Score and Nev Chandler. And then later, of course, Tom Hamilton. Just, how to describe the action and just really to help bring it to life. And that's what I envisioned myself doing someday. I wanted to be the voice of the Indians.
So when you were watching games, were you really more studying the announcers and the game was, something not as important, or were they equally important?
Oh, they were equally important. They were, I loved watching the game and I was really into the game itself, but I was also really into listening to the announcers. And, sometime even today, when I'm watching a game or a wrestling match, I think of what I would say, like, oh, I would have said this at this spot. It would have been so good. Yeah. So unfortunately, I've gotten a chance to do a lot of announcing, but a lot of announcing that I don't get to do, it's still like happening in my head.
So do you feel nerves when you're doing that? I've always wondered that because you do have to be really spontaneous and in the moment. Do you feel nervous at all, or is it just like an adrenaline rush?
I don't. I don't get nervous about going out and, getting in the ring and they ring the bell and the show starts. I've had a lot of experience now and, I love doing it. I know I can do it. So I'm not nervous that I'm going to mess up or anything. I'm more nervous about not announcing than I am about announcing. It's like I always feel happy when I know that I have a show coming up or a game coming up. I have something on the calendar to look forward to. And I get nervous when I don't. It's like, oh, geez, when's my next game or my next show going to be? But when I have that, it's like, hey, that's coming up. I'm going to be on the microphone.
Okay.
That's what I get nervous about, not actually doing it.
Yeah, I mean, to me, that's such a foreign thing, but that's so in your DNA, who you are. Mm-hmm. So speaking of DNA, let's back up a little bit as far as, how you came to this career in being an announcer, sportscaster. I read an essay recently about a defining moment in your life that kind of led to your future. So can you tell me about that defining moment?
Well, that was the moment that I discovered professional wrestling. And it's funny because a lot of kids are into wrestling. And when I got to college, most of the people in college had outgrown it. But I never outgrew it because I never really saw wrestling when I was a kid. I just never, it just never popped up on my screen because I was watching cartoons. You wake up in the morning and you watch the Flintstones, and on Saturday morning there's the Super Friends and the Smurfs, and that's what I was watching. I didn't change the channel to see what else was on. So I didn't really discover wrestling until I was in high school, and I would stay up and on Saturday night and watch Saturday Night Live. And I loved Saturday Night Live, and my friends did, and we would like talk about all the jokes and the funny skits and stuff. But every once in a while, Saturday Night Live would take a break, and then Saturday night's main event would come on. And I
Mm-hmm.
was like, whoa. I was like, what's this? And the first show that I saw had Hulk Hogan against Nikolai Volkov. And that's what I wrote about in my story. That was a defining moment. And
Mm-hmm.
for some reason, I really must not have known anything about wrestling or how it works, because I thought, you know what? Nikolai Volkov is going to he's a big, tough Russian. He's going to beat Hulk Hogan. He's going to win the title. And of course that didn't happen. Hogan wins. He almost always wins. And so, but just the action and the drama and just the colorfulness of the characters, I was like really, really hooked. Just like I was on baseball when I was 4. That's how much I got hooked on wrestling when I was 14. And I just wanted to watch it any chance I could. And I was just off the races from there. And it became a defining moment because it was a lot easier for me to break in as an announcer in wrestling as it was in baseball. It took me decades to get my first job in professional baseball, but it only
Okay.
took me a couple of years to get my first job announcing professional wrestling.
Yeah, so tell us how that came about. That first gig being an announcer.
Yeah, it's interesting because I used to practice being a wrestling announcer. I would be walking around campus, sort of announcing wrestlers introducing to I was doing it in my head when I was just walking around campus.
I was
But
going
I
to say,
never,
was that out loud?
not too loud. I was trying not to come off as being weird, but I was sort of doing it to myself. And, but I never knew how the wrestling announcer got his job. I would go to a show. I'd see some guy get in the ring. He's announcing. I was like, how did he get that job? I never knew. I knew how you got a job as a baseball announcer. You announced minor league games and you tried to get on as a local TV sports announcer, and then you
Work your way up.
Yeah. So there's a pathway there that you could see, because you could see it happen in real life. But I didn't. But wrestling was a new thing to me. It's like, well, how did you become the wrestling announcer? So
Yeah.
at that point, I was working down in Mansfield, and I was copy editor for the newspaper down there, and I saw there was a local wrestling show coming up. So I was like, oh, I'm going to go watch this show. And I was like, hey, I'm going to go up to the promoter and give him a tape of me announcing baseball, again, to myself in the crowd with my little tape recorder. It's just a sound of me announcing something. I'm going to give him this tape and say, hey, I'd like to announce for you someday. And he let me announce the next show, and I did it for 30 more years.
That is amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, how fortuitous. So you just hand him a tape and then he accepts it and asks you to do the very next match.
Right. Yeah.
Were you kind of dumbfounded by that?
I was very pleasantly surprised. Like, wow, this worked. I'm going to get to announce this show. And so it was like my first show, and it was like an amazing, amazing experience.
So did you have to do a lot of studying beforehand? Like, so you talked about that defining moment at 14 when you saw Nikolai Volkov. Did you then start searching for matches and so you could study it and learn all about professional wrestling?
Well, this was really pre-internet, so the only thing I knew was what I would read in like the magazines. You would have to get
okay.
Pro Wrestling Illustrated or Inside Wrestling, and that's how you would learn about any other wrestlers that you didn't see on TV. But for a really small show like this, I was just going to be the ring announcer. All I had to do was just, dress up and get to the show and then talk to all the wrestlers before the show and say, okay, how much do you weigh and what city are you from? And like, what's your nickname? So you could announce that before each match. So really, that's always a big deal. That's why I always try to get to shows as early as possible. And sometimes my family's like, oh my gosh, we're here so early. So I have enough time to walk around and meet everybody. And then once I'm ready and I have my list of who's on the show and I'm to announce them, that's when I become not nervous. I get nervous. You asked about being nervous. I get nervous about not being ready for the show. But once I'm ready for the show, I've got everything ready, I'm good. I'm like, all right, I'm ready to go. Because you know how people have that dream of, oh, I have a test and I haven't studied for it. That sort of anxiety dream. I have that
Yeah.
for this. I dream that the show's about to start and I'm not ready. I'm not dressed. I don't have my lineup. There were a couple of times when I would have a dream that I'm supposed to wrestle. And I'm like,
Oh,
I don't
wow.
even know how to wrestle. And I'm supposed to go out there and have a match. I'm like, how am I going to do this? So those are the kind of anxiety dreams I have, not of doing it, but of not being ready to do it.
That just shows how different people are, because if I was in the situation you were in and I didn't know anything about the wrestlers until I went and talked to them, pre-match, I would be freaking out. I would be freaking out. But that is what set you on course.
It did. Once I was able to get everything together, I was able to go from there. And then, you meet these same wrestlers the second time, the third time, because I was working with that same company. And then some of them got to be my friends.
Yeah. So then you knew more about them.
Yeah, I knew them. I'd see them wrestle a few times, and all I had to do was learn who the new guys were.
Okay.
Yeah.
So going back to that part about research, was there, I'm trying to remember cable. Well, I guess we had cable in the 80s. So were you able to find, am I calling it the right thing? Are they matches? Is that what you call them?
Yeah, wrestling matches.
Matches. Okay. Such a novice. So could you go back and find those on cable or watch those at all? Or no, it was just magazines?
Not really. It was, and a lot of those little companies, they didn't really sell their shows even on video. It was really only after I got started in 1995, 96 that I sort of switched from not just doing the ring announcing, but also sitting at ringside and calling the play-by-play. Sometimes I would be like, I would go up to the ring, I'd introduce the two wrestlers, then I'd walk back to the camera that was shooting the show, and I would do play-by-play, standing here talking into the side of the camera.
And really?
They would start selling those shows. They would sell t-shirts, they would sell merchandise, and they would sell videos of their shows. And then later on, once the internet came along and they got websites, then they would sell those shows on the websites.
Okay.
And eventually that would flip over from VHS to DVD.
So that was a whole technology shift for you all along the way,
yeah.
Everything changing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So the dream of being an announcer when you were younger was for baseball. So when did you get your first baseball announcing gig?
That took a really long time. It's funny because I went, when I got out of college, that's what I did. I drove around all over the Midwest to different minor league teams. I drove to Fort Wayne, Indiana. I drove to Davenport, Iowa. That's as far as I went, handing out my tapes, says, hey, I'd like to announce to you, blah, blah, blah. And of course, nothing happened. So, it wasn't until 2015, which was 23 years after I graduated from college, that I finally got to announce for a baseball team. And really that all stemmed from wrestling, because what happened was there's a missing piece in between, and that missing piece is MMA, which is mixed martial arts, also known as like UFC style cage.
Okay, I've heard of that.
Yeah. So what happened was we moved to Cuyahoga Falls, and the guy across the street was a promoter of MMA. And he was starting his own show. He's like, hey, I'm starting my own MMA show. And I said, hey, I announce wrestling. Let me give you a tape of me announcing for wrestling.
You're probably both looking at each other like, what in the world?
Yeah, actually, it was my wife's idea. She met him and she told him about me and says, he can announce for you. That's right. I forgot that my wife actually met him first and says, hey, Jeff can announce for you. And he
wives are the best promoters.
Oh, geez. She's such a great promoter of me in every aspect, not just, in everything. But this guy happened to live across the street from us. And so he gave me a chance to announce on his MMA show. So I had to basically learn that whole sport from scratch, because I didn't really watch MMA. I watched a couple times. I didn't really like it because I didn't know what was going on. It seemed they were kind of on the ground, grappling around. It didn't seem like much was happening. So I had to kind of watch it and learn it and kind of figure out what was going on. And once I knew what was happening, I liked it. I sort of understood it a lot better. And so I was on this show called Fight Fest. And the great thing is, we were on Sports Time Ohio, and we would come on TV right after the Indians games.
Oh.
So I wasn't announcing for the Indians, but I was coming on right after the Indians announcing these fighting shows, and lots of people were seeing it because they would just leave the
Okay.
TV on, and then I would pop up talking about these fights. Like, hey, Jeff, I saw you on your fighting show. And so how that evolved was that's how I got into that sport. And I eventually, cold called other promoters trying to get on some other shows. And I started working for a different group called Caged Madness. And I would do play by play for that. And my buddy George Phillips, he would be the announcer in the cage. So he would announce the fighters, they'd come out, they'd fight. And then I would do the play by play at cage side, I guess you would say. But then I would get to walk into the cage and interview the winners. So that's how I got to be friends with George. I was doing these MMA shows with George. And then George was also, he was an announcer, but he was also like kind of a business consultant type of guy. So he would be a business consultant for a lot of businesses up in Lake County, including the Lake County Captains, which was a minor league team of the Indians. And that's how, and then when they needed a new announcer, they hired George, and George says, hey, Jeff, I'm the new announcer for the Captains, but I need a backup, and so you should audition to be the backup. And so I got the backup job, so I got to announce like 1/3 of their games. And it was
that's amazing.
It was fantastic.
Wow, look at the providence there, how that all worked out.
Mm-hmm. So I announced for the Captains, and then a few years later, I got to announce for the Lake Erie Crushers, which was a smaller team that wasn't affiliated with a major league team, but I got to do a couple more years of announcing for the Lake Erie Crushers. So I got to announce for both of those teams, which was really what I wanted to do when I grew up, as being.
So your dream came true.
It did. It took a very long time and a very circuitous route, but it did come true.
But I think that's a good message to the people who are watching.
Yeah.
I think especially in our culture where we want everything quickly, to see that you did achieve your dream. But like you said, it was circuitous. It wasn't linear, but you got there.
Yeah, and sometimes you have a lot of obstacles to overcome because some, people want to grow up and be a policeman or a firefighter or a lawyer. It's like, yeah, you can do that. But some people want to be really hard things like a major ballerina or a Supreme Court justice or an astronaut or something. And one of my books, which we'll talk about in a second, it's about a kid who's trying to grow up and be a wrestler. But I really wanted that to resonate with any kid who wanted to dream of any kind of thing, whether it's an easy thing to do or a really hard thing to do, to stick with it and then someday you can get it.
Exactly. Well, before we talk about your path to authorship, I wanted to ask you, because you referenced your books and we talked about it in the intro, but what about the big drama of professional wrestling do you love? Why does that appeal to you?
Well, it's really a combination of two things that I love, and one is sports, of course, and the other is theater. I was into theater when I was a kid, and my brother and sister were both even more into it than me. But I auditioned for Oliver with the Kenley Players.
Yes.
In Akron, and I got it. I got to be I got hired to be one of the little British ragamuffin kids, the sort of gang of kids that sort of hung around with Oliver Twist. But it all went away because we went on vacation when I was 10 to Montreal. And when I came back, I discovered that they had moved the rehearsal schedule up by a week, and they had already started without me. And they were like, oh, you can't catch up. We have to drop you because we've already started. And I was just heartbroken because I really liked it. I really wanted to be in the theater. And so that could have been a completely different path. If I had gotten that gig and done more theater, I could have been like Theater Kid and stuff. And the reason why I like pro wrestling so much is it's sports and theater. It's really, really both. You've got
that makes complete sense.
Characters and the stories, and it's just got everything.
That makes complete sense. Knowing that side of you that you love theater. I read that story about you missing the rehearsal, and I was devastated for you.
Oh, it was so terrible.
That was so sad. So sad. So how does that love of the drama and theater play into your role as the announcer when you're announcing a pro wrestling match?
Yeah, well, basically you want to kind of get that excitement across to the fans. So when you're introducing a wrestler, especially like a good guy wrestler, you want to give him a big, yeah, a big introduction that's going to cause the crowd to cheer. And, and then you say it like that, like, yeah. And I try to, all these sports kind of sort of dovetail into each other. So when I finally got to do baseball, you're supposed to announce the other team in sort of a normal, regular, professional way, but you want them to cheer for the captains and the crusher. So I would kind of try to give them an intro that was almost like a pro wrestling good guy intro. It's like, Sean Dunston Jr. And so the fans would cheer and stuff. So I kind of gave them that sort of like a pro wrestling type of nudge so the fans could cheer for these ball players, which they probably haven't really heard of before. They're minor leaguers. You don't really know them all individually. So I wanted to give them a little boost so the fans would kind of get behind them.
Yeah, exactly. That makes sense. That's so interesting how you combine all those elements of your personality and it comes out in your announcing. Okay, so I'm going to put you on the spot with something.
Okay.
So I thought it would be fun for our viewers to hear your announcing voice. And so I want you to pretend I'm a big time wrestler and I'm Debbie the Bookworm. And I want you to announce me for a match.
Okay.
Let's hear it.
And her opponent from the darkest corners of the library, Debbie the Bookworm.
That is awesome. That is awesome.
I'm supposed to cheer for you. So you're slapping 5, you're signing books on the way to the ring.
That's awesome. I love that.
Thank you.
So segueing into becoming an author. So you have this world where you're an announcer, you're seeing your dreams come true, announcing baseball, announcing professional wrestling, and then you decide to write about these characters and about the history of pro wrestling. What made you decide to do that?
Well, it was when I was announcing wrestling. At one point, I had to kind of take a break because I was driving to Pittsburgh all the time. And we had like a 1-year-old and it was getting a little bit difficult to travel with such a little kid. So I had to take a bit of a break. And during the year that I took off, I said, I have so many stories just from the first 12 years of being a wrestling announcer. I have to write them down for my wife and my kid. I have to write these stories up for them. So really it's a book dedicated to them. And it's, it talks about, my life and growing up and everything and all the stuff we just talked about, but also talks about all sort of the crazy stories and the crazy characters I encountered in wrestling. Like I'd be home and Bubba the Stompin' Hillbilly would call my mom and say, "Is Jeff home?" This is like, "Yeah, he is. Who is talking?" "Well, this is Bubba the Stompin' Hillbilly."
Stompin' Hillbilly.
Like, "Jeff, there's a hillbilly on the phone for you." And I was talking and he'd say, "Okay, we've got a show coming up on the 30th. Are you available?" Yeah. And so, and just all the different crazy people that would show up.
So it all started with you wanting to write down for your wife and daughter.
Yeah, it was like I didn't want to lose these ideas, these stories. I didn't want to lose them myself if I grew old and sort of forgot them. You never know how much you remember when you're older. So I sat down, I wrote the book. It was called This Side of the Mic. And Jennifer came up with the title of that. Like find out what it's like on this side of the mic. So that was my sort of first book with all of the, and it's about chasing a dream. Without giving too much away, I found out that the dream that was the dream I was chasing, but also having my own family, having my wife and daughter was an even more fulfilling dream. So I sort of gave away the end of the book there, but that's kind of what I learned, that was the real dream, was to have my family.
Yes. I read some of that book. It was very good. Very good. So what was your next book then?
Well, my next book is funny because we homeschool our daughter, and when you're a homeschool parent, you get drafted to do some teaching. So like if you're a science person, you got to teach the science class. And if you're an English teacher or writing person, so I was sort of did some of the writing coaching and stuff for the kids. And we had this one class called the 1-year adventure novel. And this was a curriculum where you learn all about stories and how they go together and how to write your own story. So I did that. And my wife said, "You know what, Jeff, you have to write one too." right along with them. So the only two kids in the class, just our daughter and one other girl, and they were writing their story and I was writing my story. And I came up with a story about a kid who wants to be a wrestler. And he's a young underdog kid. And sort of the hook of it and the title of it is Wrestling is Real. And that's the name of the book. So in this book, in this universe, professional wrestling is a legitimate sport. It's not a show. Okay. It's not a thing where the two wrestlers talk about their match, and they're really wrestling each other, but in a pro wrestling way, not amateurs grappling on a mat with a circle around it. So the whole realm of professional wrestling where you're jumping off the top rope and you're just, that's a real thing in this book. So the kids are competing for real, and that's why the book is called Wrestling is Real.
And that's his dream, to be
that's his dream. And he's
wrestler.
A small kid. His obstacle is his height. He's a very little guy, and he has a lot of self-doubt and a lot of doubt about his own ability to make it. But that's what he loves and what he wants to do, and that's the dream that he's chasing.
I love that. So you completed successfully your homeschool writing project.
Yes, I did. And the girls did too. The girls in my class, they wrote their little books too. And so we all had our little 12 chapter books where, the hero starts out like this and then they go on a journey and there's ups and downs and then here's the climax. And then the last chapter, everything sort of settles down and you figure out what happens at the end.
Have the denouement, right?
Yes.
Exactly. So then the next 3 books are all about the pro wrestling history and the different characters.
Yes, these are like, so as I, progressed and as a wrestling announcer, as a fan, I realized that there wasn't really a definitive set of history books. Different people would write, different wrestlers would write about their own memoirs and, the different matches they had and stuff. But it's like, I'm not really seeing any real history books. Like, here's the history of professional wrestling, volume 1, volume 2, volume 3. So what I would do is there was a thing came out that called it was called the WWE Network. And that was a cable channel that they had. And it was actually an online channel that they had where they had all of their shows on there. So I'm like, oh my gosh, this is great. I'm like a kid in a candy store. When I was 25 and I wanted to watch SummerSlam, I would have to call my cable company and pay $25. But here, you can pay $9 a month and watch all the shows that were all there. So you can just pay that amount per month and you can just go crazy and watch all the.
Yeah, you're probably ecstatic.
Yeah, I was like, this is amazing. So I'm going to go back to the very beginning, to the very first WrestleMania in 1985, and I'm going to watch that show. And I would go online with my wrestling buddy friends online and I would write about it. And I would say, this is what I thought about this show, and I think that this person was the MVP. So I did that for a while. Then I thought, hey, that would be a great book. I'm going to write the whole history of the World Wrestling Federation, and I'm going to write about all the shows and add up all the MVP awards. And at the end, you find out who was the MVP of the World Wrestling Federation, starting from the first WrestleMania in 1985 until they changed the name to WWE in 2002 on our honeymoon. We went on our honeymoon and I came back and I found that the WWF had changed its name. I'm like, what? What on earth? I was only gone a week. What's happening here? So this is real big
change your whole world.
Yeah, you have to call it something different now.
Was it World Wrestling Entertainment then? Is that what?
It was the World Wrestling Federation, the WWF.
Right.
But they lost a lawsuit to the World Wildlife Fund, with the WWF with the panda, the conservation people. They lost a lawsuit and then they lost the ability to use those letters. So they changed it to something else. Then they picked, let's make it World Wrestling Entertainment.
Entertainment,
WWE. So I think that it's really taken about 20 some years to get just about everybody to call it WWE and not want to call it by the old name of the WWF.
Well, that's so funny because I said in the intro, I know nothing about professional wrestling other than I've heard the name Hulk Hogan, but even I know WWF. I've heard that. Right. That's what I think. When I saw WWE, when I was, researching, I don't know what that is, you know, so.
It's the same company.
Yeah.
Mhm.
but they had to switch over. That's an interesting story in and of itself, why they had to change their name.
Yeah, it was a big legal
Yeah.
drama.
So name each book.
Okay,
So
so
King of.
the first history book is called King of New York. Who
Mm-hmm.
was the MVP of the World Wrestling Federation. That has Hulk Hogan and Andre the Giant on the cover. And that's the
Yep.
history of the number one company, which is the World Wrestling Federation. And
Okay.
then the second book is about its rival, WCW, or World Championship Wrestling. Now, that was based in Atlanta. So that book is
Okay.
called King of Atlanta, who was the MVP of
Okay.
World Championship Wrestling. That was the number two group. But at one point, in like 1996 through 98, it got super hot and it moved into first place. Everybody was watching them instead. So they
Okay.
had a brief run as the number one group, but then they did everything wrong and ended up going bankrupt and getting
Oh
bought
boy.
out by the WWF.
Okay.
So they went from number two to number one, absolutely a straight shot into the basement just a few years later.
Into the basement. Oh no.
And
A
then the
sad
last book,
history.
yes, it's a hilarious book because it has so many crazy highs and lows and so much really great wrestling and so many really dumb stuff that happens in the book too that makes you, yeah, I see why these yahoos went out of business.
Yeah, the roller coaster ride there.
Yeah, it really was. And then finally, the last book that I wrote was called King of Philadelphia, which is about the number three group. And these were sort of the wild, crazy outlaws called Extreme Championship Wrestling. And this is where they're all, hitting each other with tables and diving off of balconies and doing the most dangerous stuff they could think of just to get the really crazy fans to get behind them and to try to stay financially afloat when they're competing with these two other companies. Like, let's see how crazy we can be. So on the cover of that one is a person slamming another wrestler through a burning table.
Okay.
Which really
it's funny because I have seen clips of those kinds of things where they're just doing the most insane, seemingly dangerous things.
Oh, very dangerous. Yeah. Smash each other with guitars and every weapon.
Yeah. Yep. I have seen those clips. So speaking of dangerous things, tell the people that are watching about your little foray into becoming a wrestler for a brief moment when you started out as a referee.
Yes. That was really pretty much the craziest night of my entire career because I showed up to be the announcer. They had some other person there instead. And so they said, well, Jeff, you can be the referee. So I'm like, okay, that shouldn't be too hard. But in the third match, the two guys who were both, had experience in the WWF, they tried to put on the most, they both wanted to be the good guy. So they made me the referee, the bad guy. So I was this sort of no fun, hyper vigilant referee. I was really getting in the way of their match. And so they threw me out of the ring twice. And I never learned how to do that and not kill yourself. So
weren't they under the impression that you were a wrestler of some sort?
Well, they were under the impression that I was a referee who knew how to get shoved down to the mat. The plan, I was just supposed to get shoved down to the mat. But they thought, referees know how to get thrown out of the ring. They get trained to get, knocked around a little bit. So we're just going to throw them out. And they did that to me twice because they thought I knew how to do it. And I didn't.
So they didn't think you were a wrestler. They thought you were a genuine referee, but you were just doing
referee. I was not a trained referee. No.
Okay.
I was just an announcer wearing a striped shirt.
And you said the first time when I read this, you caught the rope, so that was okay. But then the second time they threw you out, you slammed your face.
Yeah, on the ring apron. That's the corner of the ring like this. And they say, oh, that's the hardest part of the ring. Yes, it is the hardest part of the ring.
And that's where you hit.
Yes, and the thing is, their plan worked because the fans were booing me. They were cheering for they loved it. They loved seeing me get beaten up.
Well, in true professional wrestling spirit, though, of the showman, tell them what you did when you exited the auditorium.
Well, I took the one of the guys who was called Big Bully Busick, and he wore this big bowler hat and smoked a cigar. So at the end, after they threw me out of the ring twice, I'm like, I found his hat on the floor, and I put it on, and I marched out of the arena. I'm going to steal your hat.
I wasn't there, but this is kudos to you as a writer, because when I read about that, I could just picture the scene, the way you wrote it. It was so real. So great
Good.
writing. That was excellent. So
Thank you. Glad that came to life for you.
it did. It absolutely did. So speaking of writing, are you currently working on a new project?
Yes, I am. I'm working on a book called, well, actually, I'm working on a couple of things. I'm working on a longer version of Wrestling is Real, because the first time it was just for that class. It was only 12 chapters long. And when we published it, my wife said, "This looks like a pamphlet." So she started calling it the pamphlet. She said, "I want you to write a real whole novel." So what I did was I made it into a full length novel. I made it 3 times longer. So now the part that I wrote is just the first third of the story. And then I'm really glad that she said that, because the book became a lot more interesting and satisfying, because I have brought in a lot of girl characters in the whole rest of the book. And because the idea is we're going to start a girls wrestling club. And I always doubted my ability to write for girls. And, I only had one girl in the whole first part of the book. So they brought in all these other girls, and they had all these different personalities. And it really helped me expand as a writer, to know that I could write for girls as well as boys.
That's
and
good.
So now the whole book is a lot longer, and it's really better for both boys and girls. So that's one thing that's coming out. It's going to be with Owl Talon Press, which is one of our friends. David Balog runs that along with somebody else. And that's going to be an imprint on Owl Talon Press later this year. And I'm also working on another book, which is a book called Senior Tsunami Stories. And that's a book about the aging population and a bunch of funny stories, all starring senior citizens. So I'm coming up with a lot of different characters. Some of them are inspired by older people that we met. And so this is sort of a breakaway where it doesn't have anything to do with pro wrestling, which is good, People who aren't into wrestling, I'll have something else that they might be interested in. And just sort of some funny comedy stories, fictional stories about different senior citizens.
And I have read some of them, and they're very funny. They're excellent.
Good, thanks. I have to keep coming up with new ones, so I only have a few. I'm sort of building on that. So someday I'll have a whole collection of these senior stories.
So it would be funny to write about your professional wrestlers that become senior citizens and what their lives are like.
Yeah, because they do. Some of them, they're still around in their 70s and 80s.
I mean, like a fictional take on it, that would be kind of funny to, create fictional pro wrestlers in their senior years. But anyways, so speaking of all your books, can you tell our viewers where they can find your books?
Well, the best way to find our books is to find us on social media and contact us there. That way we can send the book straight to you and autograph it. So, I'm Jeff Gorman on Facebook, and on Twitter, I'm at Jeff D. Gorman, and you can just contact me there. And even on LinkedIn. So I would be happy to connect with people on LinkedIn. So if you want to find me on Facebook, LinkedIn, or Twitter, which is at Jeff D. Gorman, you can hook up there, and I can get you an autographed copy of my books.
Okay, so
you can easily email me as well. You can email me at Gorman Writer.
And if people want them really quickly and not necessarily autographed, they can find them on Amazon, right?
Yeah, they're all up there too. But you could also email us, gormanwriter@gmail.com, and I can autograph it for you. That's even better.
That's even better to have the autograph copy.
Yes.
Absolutely. Especially with your genre of book. I think it's really neat to have an autographed copy.
Great.
Especially this side of the mic. That would be a great one to have it autographed.
Yeah.
So wrapping up, you've had this whole amazing life with sportscasting, starting when you had that dream as a young boy, and all you've done, in announcing for 30 some years. What would be your best advice to someone who wants to write about any kind of sports? What would be your best advice for them?
My advice would be to definitely go for it, but, learn everything you can about that sport, watch that sport a lot. Also read a lot of books out there about that sport and figure out what can you say that hasn't been said. For me, it was writing the history books, writing a fiction book about the wrestling being real. And then, of course, I had my own story about my announcing adventures, but sort of, read about the sport, really get into it, and, figure out what is out there. What can you say that hasn't been said already? And that can be your sweet spot.
That is really good advice. Find something that somebody hasn't said yet.
Thank you.
Or a different angle on it. That's really good advice.
Because there are
Very
so many
good.
books out there. There's books about every subject. There's lots of books about every individual subject, about wrestling, about baseball, about anything, cooking, anything you're into. But there's a lot of competition even within that genre. So you want to say, what can I do that's different, that's special?
Right. That's excellent. Excellent advice. Well, I hope for everyone watching that you'll follow Jeff Gorman on Facebook, LinkedIn, get in touch with him via his email, and purchase his books. And if you have any professional wrestling fans in your family,
Yes.
friends, circle, it would be a great gift for those people. So, Jeff, thank you so much for joining me. It was really fun, and I appreciate you being here.
Thank you so much, Debbie. I really enjoy your writing as well, and I appreciate that you would have me on as one of your authors.
All right. Well, we'll keep in touch and keep people updated with what you're doing. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.